If you are working with a student who is not yet speaking or is an emergent communicator and you want to know, how can I help this student increase their overall vocal language skills, you are in the right place. Welcome to episode 145 of the Autism Outreach Podcast. I had the honor of interviewing Dr. Barbara Esch today. She is a speech language pathologist and a board certified behavior analyst and a PhD. She has extensive experience in behavioral interventions for children and adults, and she received her PhD in applied behavior analysis from Western Michigan under the direction of Dr. Jack Michael and Dr. Jim Carr, and her master's in speech pathology from Michigan State. She's published research on behavioral treatments for early speech acquisition and aphasia assessment in the Analysis of Verbal Behavior, the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, and the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disabilities. And if you're familiar with the VB-MAPP assessment, which I talk about quite a bit in all of my trainings, podcasts, it's really a helpful tool for me and has been, I don't know, for the past 10 years or 8 years, whatever, since it's been created. Dr. Esch created the early Echoic skills assessment, which in the field, sometimes we call that the EESA, and that is part of the VB-MAPP. And now she has a new early Echoic skills assessment and program planner. So we dive into, which is absolutely fascinating, kind of the history of the EESA, the history of the VB-MAPP, how that all went down and was created, which is really fascinating to me because it's a tool that I use a lot, have presented at the ASHA conference about, and actually got to meet Dr. Sundberg at ABAI once. It was just really, wow, that was neat. We talk about, what are the available sounds for students and what do they love and enjoy? What's in their environment? How do we make targets functional? We get into it today. I'm so delighted and honored for you to listen to this very important conversation today.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Thanks so much for joining us on episode 145 of the podcast. We have an amazing episode for you today. We have with us Dr. Barbara Esch. Thank you so much for joining us. It's amazing to have you on.
Thank you, Rose. It's great to be here.
And I feel like, obviously, I know who you are because we're in the same kind of circles and things like that, being dually certified. But I started using the VB-MAPP and the EESA portion that you created. And I would oftentimes, way before I knew you, because I've been using it almost, I think, since the VB-MAPP started, because my BCBA supervisor was actually Kelly Rich. And I think Dr. Carbone, I think, was her supervisor. Her and Tammy Casper really close. And so I was an early adopter of the VB-MAPP. So I've been doing it a long time and probably saying yes and saying your name for many years.
I think, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've been using it since it came out. So yay, thanks for that. But for those of us that are new to you and your work, I'm just excited for you to tell us kind of your journey into the field and what was first, SLP, BCBA, how that all came about. So share with us.
Sure. Yeah. Well, SLP first. That was my first career, my first hat. I worked in public schools and private schools and hospitals and nursing homes and clinics and so on. And I also had a private practice where I would go into people's homes and provide services there. And so in those venues, I saw a lot of children and I saw teenagers and young adults as well as geriatric patients and so on. And so that represented a really wide array of problems from, everything from a simple articulation problem to neurologic diseases like Parkinson's and head and neck cancer, surgical repairs, those kinds of things, aphasia after stroke and hearing impairment, motor vehicle accidents, anything that impaired speech and language. And, a good portion of what I did, and pretty much all that I've done for the past number of years, is trying to work with speech and language delays related to autism or other intellectual disabilities. So, along this kind of speech path journey or path, I was lucky because I had in my undergraduate degree in speech pathology, I got it here at Western Michigan University. I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I had an undergrad minor in psychology and behavioral psych. And so, that was helpful to a degree, but it was just, it wasn't, I didn't have that much experience. And so I began to observe what I was doing as a speech pathologist and seeing that there were some real gaps in my effectiveness. And, one of the stories that I tell that I really remember, it just hit me like, whoa, I need some more help, is, I had this student, and this story happened many times, but it's iconic with this one particular student. I was working really hard to show him, to try to grow his language. And I couldn't figure out if I can teach him, if I say point to the cup, he would point to the cup. And then I would hold the cup up and I would say, what is this? And he wouldn't say anything. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know why. I couldn't figure that out. And the only thing that I had sort of to fall back on was the idea of, well, he doesn't have the concept of cup. But he sort of did, but not a very broad skill base. And so I knew that I had these gaps in effectiveness, and I really needed to not only become more effective, but more efficient in how I was teaching, to not waste time. These are children, and you want them to learn as quickly as possible and move forward. So with the emotional and every other kind of support from my husband, who is also a behavior analyst, I decided to go back to grad school, and I came here to Western. We were living in South Florida at the time. And so I came up and went back to grad school and to get my PhD. And then we started a consulting company at about that time, about the time when the people were really clamoring for more effective treatments for individuals with autism. And so my skills and interests at that time really dovetailed with, I think, what the needs were that I was becoming aware of. And so, I realized that I had sort of this niche of skills that, as a speech pathologist, I didn't really know how to teach, but behavior analysts know how to teach, but they didn't know what to teach when it came to speech and language skills. They didn't know about tongue movement or vocalizing, or they didn't really know how to sort of analyze the whole speech acquisition process. So I realized that, these two hats were really helpful in kind of putting it together. And then I met Mark Sundberg.
Boom.
He was working on the VB-MAPP. I went to every conference that I could. And of course, I had been friends since my husband was in grad school with Hank Schlinger, and that was extremely helpful as well. And of course, they all learned from Jack Michael. So when Mark was working on the VB-MAPP, he and I were talking, and he said, would you write the Echoic milestone for the VB-MAPP? And it was the opportunity of a lifetime, because what it did was really kind of define for me, this is an area that that really both fields could benefit from kind of seeing what the other one knows and kind of putting their heads together and so on. And so that really got the ball rolling, and was very, very helpful in kind of leading me toward developing that first EESA in the VB-MAPP.
Oh, I love that. And so if speech therapists that may not know about the VB-MAPP, although I do talk about it in most of my trainings, it's a really great assessment, and the EESA is a portion of it. And so I'm hoping to in the spring do an Esch and ACE course about the VB-MAPP. But also, when I first started my online business 6 years ago, I really thought that every speech therapist should feel comfortable giving and administering the VB-MAPP. But I've kind of taken a step back on that because I know that some speech therapists, it's just probably not going to work for them in their current environment. Maybe they're school-based and they have 60 or 70 kids on their caseload. But what I've really been talking a lot about is for people to understand the information from a report from the VB-MAPP and from the EESA, and to be able to inform goals, because it's such a great assessment, with your EESA being such an important part of it as well. So how exciting. So with Dr. Sundberg, I met him at ABAI. I was with Mary Barbera. We were just like at the bar having a drink, and I got to meet Dr. Sundberg. He was really great. But I haven't heard him talk. Like, I've heard him talk on recorded. So I'm wondering, when he was developing the VB-MAPP, did he talk about it at different conferences or... Oh, he did. Oh, yeah. Okay. And was talking about it.
All-day workshops, and he was very, very generous with beta copies, like draft versions.
Wow.
And actually, that was what gave me the idea after the VB-MAPP had been out for a while, and the EESA, the Echoic skills assessment, was one page of that very large assessment. I started thinking about surveying people that were using the VB-MAPP, and in particular, what is it about the EESA, the Echoic skills assessment, that's not working for you, or how do you use it, or what else do you need? And so Nikia Dower, who is the co-chair of the speech pathology behavior analysis SIG at ABAI, she put together a Survey Monkey, because she's really smart and knows how to do those.
Yes, she is.
And we got over 100 responses, and there were a lot of things that people wanted, and I was just so happy and grateful that people took time to really tell me. And mostly what I found that they wanted, that they didn't have, and there wasn't room to put it in the VB-MAPP, was, well, now that I have these test results, what do I do with them? I still don't know. All I have is a number, and I still don't know how to teach my child to speak. And so so that led me to, is it okay if I hold up?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that led me to write the protocol, the new test, and a guide, which has a bunch of chapters in it. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about that in a minute, if you'd like me to kind of tell you, how that's different, but it's way expanded, and hopefully it will now answer that question and help people. Just like Mark did, I'm now doing workshops and lots of talks and so on at conferences and here and there to help people learn. This is what this means, and here's how you can use it. So we can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, I would love to discuss that. So can you talk with us, because some people may not be familiar with a lot of people that listen are speech therapists, and we have BCBAs as well. But what is the difference between the EESA that is in the VB-MAPP, which is a portion of the VB-MAPP, and then your new product, which is the Early Echoic Skills Assessment and Program Planner? Can you just tell us what the difference is with each of those?
Sure. And in fact, what I'm calling it is the original EESA, and now the new EESA. the original EESA was just the test, and it had 100 items on it, and it assesses a person's ability to repeat what they hear from one syllable to 3 syllables. And there were there are 5 subtests on the original EESA. And so on the new one, we got rid of the subtest 4 and 5 or 4 and 5 because it wasn't really necessary. It was on prosodic features, and I didn't really feel that was as useful as some other sorts of things. So that will continue to stay in the VB-MAPP, that one page 100 item assessment, until Mark decides to revise the VB-MAPP, and then he'll decide how much of the new test, which is now 5 pages. It's still 5 groups, but it's much more expanded information. And so he'll decide what he wants. But for people that are just now buying the new EESA and the program planner and all of that, it still has 100 items. So they can simply give the new test, take that number, and insert that into the milestones for the Echoic milestone, for the Echoic part of it. And then they're done with that. But then to figure out, well, now what do I do? How do I teach it or whatever? They'll need the guidebook and the protocol for the new EESA, because what that does is the new EESA is based on so the EESA is not an articulation test. It's a test about how well can a child, or anybody, could be somebody that's 45 years old, but speaking, but how well can the learner echo or repeat what they hear? And so it turns out that we don't really, with early speech learners, that's who we're geared toward. We don't really need to know whether they make articulation errors, because, we tolerate articulation errors for years and years and years, way long after children are speaking rapidly in, 5, 6, 7 or more syllables on one breath, and so on. So there is a place and a time to evaluate specific articulation, but with the early speech learner, that's not it. What we need to evaluate with them is how complex can a syllable be, and you can still say it. And so the complexity of the syllable, or SC, syllable complexity, we're measuring 3 things. We're measuring how well did you do with the number of syllables? And we're going to increase that number from 1 syllable up to 6 syllables. And how well do you do if there are different numbers of consonants? So, for example, if I say mama, that has 1 consonant and 1 vowel. But if I say mommy, that still has 1 consonant, but now it has 2 different vowels. So that's harder. And so we're looking at the number of different consonants and the number of different vowels. So those 3 things, number of total syllables, number of different consonants, and number of different vowels, that sort of defines how complex a syllable is. So now if you say, well, I just want my child to say cookie, well, that's 2 syllables. And it's it's 1 consonant, but it's 2 vowels. So if a child can't do that, then we need to back up a little bit on one or the other of those elements, one of those measures. And so we don't have to change everything, but we need to know how hard is it to say any particular phrase or combination of syllables. So that's what the new EESA is about. There's in the guide, there's a whole chapter on syllable complexity and learning how to code that if you don't know. The entire EESA is, I should kind of throw this in, is written for anybody that finds themselves with the responsibility to teach someone to speak. So you shouldn't have to have a degree in speech pathology or a degree in behavior analysis to be able to understand what I've written or to be able to do it, to give the test. But anyway, the guide then gives some background chapters about syllable complexity and these 3 complexity components and how you can sort of slide the scale on one or the other until you hit sort of that sweet spot of what the learner can repeat. And then it guides the person that's teaching how to sort of toggle those forward. Let's change another element. Now let's change another element. Nope, they didn't get it. Then let's back up a little bit and let's keep this going back and forth so that the complexity grows, but so does their skill. So what happens a lot of time is they don't have the skill and we increase the complexity and they can't keep up. And so it's sort of really taking a step back to say, well, how does the typically developing learner learn how to speak? And that's exactly what they do, as you know.
Yeah. Well, I love this so much because I feel like I do have the product, Different Roads. I got it on my desk and I've been looking at it. I feel like this is a future CEU, guys. But I think it's really good because, when I first started in my online business doing like consulting and things like that, I felt like every ABA clinic should have a speech therapist because where I live in Cleveland, Ohio, they really do. I mean, unless it's maybe some big chain that is kind of sweeping through town, most ABA providers really do have speech therapists. But what I've realized is not everybody does have access to a speech therapist. And it's not because they might want access to a speech therapist, but they may not have that. So I think this will be really nice. The other thing that I've really seen a lot of is sometimes I'll consult internationally with parents that maybe they don't have speech language pathologists that, it might be an autistic learner, but they are not working on imitation. They are not working on echoics. You know what I mean? And so it's just to have that international piece too. I think this will be very exciting for people that literally don't have access to somebody who's going to develop the target words. Like this is where my mind goes as a speech language pathologist and BCBA is like, this is really great information. And I used to love, last year, I didn't see as many clients. I stepped away from my public school gig to do ABA speech, which means not a lot of therapy. But one of the students I worked with most recently was in middle school and we did the VB-MAPP and we did the EESA barb. We did it. I administered it and he started and I picked up, started developing targets for him and he started verbalizing. And what was so exciting is he started verbalizing and he could say all the same sounds that we say. And he didn't develop verbal speech until he was in 6th grade. It was absolutely amazing because he didn't have robust intervention. He lived in another country for 10 years and he was really cared for, you could tell, but he had no intervention. And so I was like, wow, this is so exciting. But what I really loved, because I felt like it was really next level kind of speech therapy, was picking his targets, picking the targets. And I'm sure I was maybe doing some of the stuff that you're discussing here, but maybe because I've just taken all the courses and done all of the things. But it was really exciting. Just like you say, it's kind of like, okay, how's the student doing? Then we're going to modify, tweak, and then look at all these words the student is able to say. So how cool that you had a hand in literally thousands and thousands of people developing verbal speech, because this is such a popular assessment in the field that I think this is going to offer that extra guidance for people that do the old EESA and then think to ourselves, well, now what? Or maybe they're not picking the best which I've talked about online. Maybe they're not picking the best target that's most functional for a learner. So do you discuss that in the book too? I've started skimming, but I haven't read the whole thing intently.
I do. And in fact, in the, I just wanted to mention that in the guide, there are 3 appendices at the end. One of them has printable program forms that can be used. Another one is just FAQ, frequently asked questions. But the last appendix in the guidebook is all about translations. And so if someone is interested in working from this perspective about, with respect to syllable complexity, but they are not speaking English, they're using some other language, there's information in there about, okay, well, then this is what you need to do. This is the sort of the guideline for how these groups were set up. And so just because it's a 3-syllable phrase in English, if you say that very same phrase in Spanish, it might not have 3 syllables. It might have 6 or 7 or something. So we have lots of examples in there on that. But to your other question, in the protocol book, which is the smaller of the 2 books, there's the test, which is 5 groups of increasingly complex syllable combinations or phrases. But then there's the work packet, and the work packet has 6 tasks in it, and that's to develop sort of a mini beginning program for your learner. And so it takes you through analyzing the skill level of syllable complexity for group 1, 2, and 3. And there's a worksheet for that. And when the EESA app comes out, we have there's a software company working on the EESA app that will all be automatically scored. But each group will be analyzed for accuracy and also for errors. And then there is program planning guidance. If it's this kind of an error, you can try these things. Now, that information is in the guide, but it also is in the protocol in a different format. And so for people that are not speech pathologists, they're going to want to kind of flip back and forth because there's a lot of redundancy in the new EESA. So that, I think it's important to say things in more than one way in case you didn't get it in the first way. This, and everybody understands things a little bit differently. And so one explanation might not have resonance, but another one might. So at the end of the work packet, then the person who has given the test has all the scores, but they also have all the analysis of the scores. How many different consonants can you throw into a word and they still get it right? How many different vowels how many can you vary? How many total syllables can you throw in and they'll still get it right? Where's the fracture point? Where does it start to break down? And as soon as you know where it breaks down, and of course, speech pathologists do this all the time, but we haven't really, I think, communicated it in those terms, sort of for non-SLP users. And I agree with you. I think it's part of our responsibility to help people whose professional job is not necessarily to teach people to speak. And that would include parents and grandparents and grandma and grandpa and other caregivers, babysitters, and so on. So, it's not just teachers in school or SLPs or behavior analysts that are charged with the responsibility to help someone learn to talk. We all are responsible for helping people learn to talk. And so I wanted to make sure that this was user-friendly enough. Now, that's not to say that that it's really something that you can absorb in 30 minutes. You really have to sort of understand, what is it that what information am I getting? And I hope that I've also made it sort of easier to score for both SLPs and non-SLPs, because every test item is written in English, but underneath that it's written in phonetics. And so those who are familiar with phonetics will benefit, I think, from being able to quickly circle something that was wrong, or mark something that wasn't correct, or that was left out, that was omitted, and so on. So we'll see. We're looking forward to getting a lot of feedback and hopefully, some new research about the data that this is providing for people.
Well, it's exciting. And I think, for me, being a user of the VB-MAPP and going to be a user of the new EESA, is that the way that I really felt comfortable using it was just starting to use it. You know what I mean? You got to kind of get in there and read the protocol book and take a training and, all those types of things, because I think that's how you feel comfortable doing it. I remember being very overwhelmed by the VB-MAPP when it first came out. And then, now I train on it and I train school staff and things like that. But you really just have to kind of get in there and I think start using it. And I think this is going to be such a nice framework for people to use, especially for, and I like, that you've cleared up, who can use it. I think there's always some confusion with that, with the VB-MAPP as well, who can use this? And it's, if you're tasked with helping somebody become a vocal communicator, that it's our responsibility, because, sometimes people, they fight about that, Barb. They fight about whose responsibility it is to work on verbal speech. So I think this is going to be a really nice tool. And it sounds like, you're doing trainings, you said at conferences and things like that. I think that will be nice for people to hear you. And then just hearing that there's a new EESA, everyone, I think that would be good. One of the questions I think somebody had is, so with the protocol, does each student need their own protocol book?
Yeah. Okay. There's room, just like in the VB-MAPP now, okay. There's room for 4 administrations.
Okay.
So, that would be way easier to do that. Yeah. And, another, I think, reason to do that is because you can keep track. I mean, putting the echoic skill in perspective, for early speech learners, the echoic skill is just a step on the way to someplace else. That's different if you're an adult and we want self-echoic skills, like, wait a minute, what did I say? And what did he say? And which direction? Where am I supposed to turn left or turn right? But for an early speech learner, it's not functional to just have a child say what you say. Why do we want them to say what we say? So that we can, under other conditions like motivation or pictures or other kinds of verbal stimuli, like other words, they can say that very same thing and, get what they asked for. In other words, or attacked or an interverbal. In other words, other language functions. And so the work packet, it takes the teacher, for lack of a better word, we're all teachers, takes you through that process of developing a speech plan, but really a mini language program, a beginning program based on what are the available sounds and what does this child like? And not just what does the learner like, but what are some things in their daily environment? What are 100 items that they see or touch every single day? And what are we going to build the program about? And if you think about an early speech learner, that's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about things they see, things they touch, things they want. And so that's where we start. Now, if your learner is 17, the things say touch or want or see might be very different, but the learning foundation with this syllable complexity skill, getting the tongue to move and hit different spots in the mouth, being able to vocalize a bunch of syllables on one breath and at a loud enough volume that it can be enforced, all of that has to be in place. And it has to have this context of verbal behavior. That is not just echoic skill, because that'll go no place. Echoic to mand, echoic to tact, echoic to intraverbal, and so on. So when I just did a 3-hour talk at Penn State at NAC on this topic, and I'll be doing a 6-hour one at the Michigan Autism Conference in October. And I think that probably will be, I've gotten some feedback that, 3 hours is kind of not enough. But 6 hours probably is, as long as people have the materials and they're familiar with it. This isn't the very first time they've ever looked at it. They should walk away from that training kind of like at the VB-MAPP. Although I went to 2 or 3, I think, workshops on the VB-MAPP, and it was helpful. I'm excited. Wow, that's exciting. That's a long talk. I'm always exhausted after talks that long, but that will be really exciting and good information. Well, I like that. What are the available sounds and what do they love and enjoy, or what's in their environment? Because I think that's what's so important. And I think that's sometime that goes together. And I think that is really kind of what I see, because I do consultations and things like that. And just even working with parents who are really trying, if they don't have professionals around them, the child may have 300 tacts or 300 echoics where they can say the word. But when I ask that next question, I say, well, how often are they spontaneously using them? It's crickets. You know what I mean? It's like, so sometimes I'm saying, like, because we're an ACE provider, and I'm always like worried that it's not ACE enough because you have to go beyond the task list. But I always put a little slide in there that says, this is how we're going beyond the task list, because one of our most popular talks is about joint attention, which I didn't learn a whole lot about being a BCBA, but I did obviously as a speech pathologist, and it's super important. And then another one is speech and language milestones, because we also don't get that information a lot as a BCBA, but I always say we have to take a step back to take a step forward. So I think what this guidebook and your protocols, and I think this is going to be really exciting, because for people that haven't learned that information specifically, or people that have learned it specifically like myself, we haven't probably conceptualized it and analyzed it to this nuance, which is really what is needed for these students. So thank you for putting this together, Barb. I'm just so excited to dig in and start using it with clients. And I'll definitely give you feedback and report back too, but I'm excited that you put it together. I will welcome it. And so how can people find out more about you? Do you have a website, or I know this is available through Different Roads to Learning, correct? Yep. And I do have a website, barbaraesch.com.
Great.
And on the website, we have, and it changes all the time, the conferences or my speaking events or engagements, that sort of thing, a list of workshops and conferences where I'll be. I also have a LinkedIn page. And then there's also an EESA Facebook page. It's not mine, but if you just put in EESA.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Where, a lot of the same information is on there. But another thing that's on the website that if people are new to sort of this whole thing, they can, there's a list with a live link to talks that I've given, like all the NAC talks are on there at Penn State. And so mostly all I've ever talked about at NAC is this topic. And so if someone is interested, now this year's talk, I don't believe they recorded it, but a couple of years ago, or the next most recent one back in time, that one's on there, and there are several others. So people can easily watch those talks and get a good background on, okay, this is what she's talking about.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was really great to connect.
Rose. It was great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.